Okay, today we are talking about building power collectively and organizing for change in Ohio libraries. So most of what we talk about today, well, when we're talking about laws and other things that may be specific geographically, may be different if you're not in Ohio, but some of the content in this presentation is relevant regardless of where you live. But do be cautious if you're not from Ohio, some things may be different. So, thank you for that introduction. We are going to go into our next slide. So, just going to show you all briefly what we plan to go over without spending too much time. And we'll delve into the details. You've met Julie. Hi, Julie. And
I'm
you've met
Julie.
me.
I'm just want to say so as a children's librarian at Cuyahoga County Public Library System, I've been pretty involved with our labor negotiations. Back in 2024, we did uh, we did successfully get some contract wins. I'm also part of the labor management committee, which we meet monthly. Then also I'm a building delegate, also known as steward. And then before I was at Cleveland Public, where I also was involved in their health and safety committee, which we met monthly as well as being a labor delegate too. So yeah, nice to have everyone here.
And I'm Kristin, and I am currently a staff organizer with the Ohio Federation of Teachers, which is a teachers union representing workers throughout the state of Ohio, historically representing teachers, and has since expanded to represent all kinds of fields, including many public service workers, public health, nurses, higher education, K through 12 educators. But the way that I came to this work was actually through my work as a librarian. I spent the last 10 years at Worthington Libraries, which is where I got my start working in library unions when my coworkers and I came together to form our union. So we'll talk more about what that's like in a moment, but glad to be here. So let's start with some basics. Some of you here might already be members of a union or have been members in the past, but most workers in the United States don't have any personal experience with labor unions. So we're going to talk a little bit more about labor history. But before we delve more in, I would like Julie to take from here.
Yeah, so before we jump into more details of union organizing, collective action, and contracts, we wanted to start from the beginning, defining what a union is. Most of your experiences with your union, if you have one, are within your workplace during working hours, or in communication through email, text, or in-person meetings, not holding signs up or protesting. There are various forms of collective action, and the members and union leadership decide together on how to best use their collective voice.
So, a labor union, if we're starting with basics, let's just get that out of the way. It's an organization of employees that come together and represent their collective interests in negotiations with their employer about grievances and disputes, wages, hours, and other terms and conditions of employment. The technical term for this is collective bargaining. So library workers in Ohio have made huge gains by forming or participating in their unions historically and presently, taking part in the collective bargaining process by working together to create policies that improve working conditions, address these widely felt issues and concerns at individual library systems, and have bargained for policies around safety, cost of living and wages, and bargaining for better benefits in their workplaces. So the way labor unions work essentially is we band together, amplifying collective power of workers to create positive change in our workplace. So rather than one individual or two individuals each asking for things, we come together as a unit to make our voices amplified. In a little bit, we're going to share some examples from your library colleagues from around the state and how they have organized together, but we're going to continue with some history.
Yeah, so unions first started in the United States in response to the cruel working conditions of the Industrial Revolution in the mid to late 1800s. In the 1940s and 50s, around a third of workers in the United States belonged to a union. Now it has dropped to about 1 in 10 in 2025, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Many factors lead to the decline of union membership, including economic shifts away from manufacturing jobs, companies moving away from areas with strong labor laws and union support, and the weakening of labor laws at the national and state level. Despite these changes, workers in Ohio and in the United States have a legally protected right to form, join, participate in, and support labor unions. This photo here, I just want to show just the history of unions. This photo shows Irish American suffrage activist Margaret Hinchy, who also served as the head of the Laundry Workers Union of New York. This group was protesting here against child labor in 1914, so over 100 years ago.
There's a rich labor history in the United States. So there have been laws that have come out of this history of organizing. Thanks to the actions of workers in our history, we do have some federal and state laws that protect our rights as workers to collectively bargain or to support forming unions in our workplaces. At the federal level, there's the National Labor Relations Act. And this oversees private sector work. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move the webinar chat out of my way. There we go. This oversees the private sector of labor relations between workers and their employers. In Ohio, uh, specifically for public sector jobs, where the majority of library jobs are in Ohio, the governing law is the Ohio Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act, which is Ohio Revised Code 4117, for those of you who like to research in the weeds. This act is overseen by the State Employment Relations Board. So the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Act actually allowed workers in Ohio to collectively bargain contracts for the very first time. And some of the earliest library unions in Ohio formed in the years immediately following the passage of this act, which was 1983. And then the other law I'd like to point out before we move forward is at-will employment. At-will employment is the most common type of employment relationship in the United States between workers and their employer. At-will means that your employer can terminate a worker's position, their employment, for any reason or even no reason, as long as they aren't violating other laws like anti-discrimination laws or anything that's a legally protected status. So while at-will employment is the norm here in our country and most of the rest of the world, there are laws that prevent employers from terminating jobs at will. So, what goes along with at-will employment? Once you form your union, one of the biggest things that goes into play when your union has been recognized are just cause protections. Just cause protections emphasize that it requires a valid reason for your employer to provide any disciplinary action against you. It cannot be for any reason at all. There has to be a record. So just cause is a critical protection that keeps workers' jobs safeguarded in case of unlawful termination. And then the second protection that kicks in once you have formed a union or if you are in an established union are Weingarten rights. These both apply to private sector and public sector. So if you are in a private library or not in a public job, these would apply as well. But Weingarten rights refer to a union worker's right to have a union representative with them in any meeting with management that could result in disciplinary action. So this provides you, the worker, with a vital advocate that can provide advice, observe the conversation, ask questions, and ensure that your rights as a worker and your contract are respected. And your union representative, in most cases, is going to be one of your coworkers who has been elected into a union rep or steward position. As Julie mentioned, she's been a steward with her library. So that's where Weingarten rights come in.
Yeah, so at this point, we wanted to talk a little bit more about unions and libraries. So, according to union stats in 2025, 27.6% of librarians were union members. In 2024, librarians who were union members earned on average almost 41% more per week than their non-union counterparts. And union library technicians earned 12% more per week than their non-union counterparts. Union members are more likely than their non-union counterparts to be covered by a retirement plan, health insurance, and paid sick leave. In 2024, that means those 95% of union members in the civilian workforce had access to a retirement plan compared to only 72% of non-union workers. Additionally, 91% of union members in the civilian workforce had access to paid sick leave compared to 79% of non-union workers. So you wanted to sort of highlight that union difference in libraries. In addition, we want to talk a little bit about how Ohio libraries unions are associated with different union organizations. In Ohio, a lot of libraries are associated with SEIU, OFT, AFT. Kristin's a part of Ohio Federation of Teachers, and then AFT is American Federation of Teachers. There's also AFSCME, USW, which is United Steelworkers, and then UAW, which is United Auto Workers, OPEIU. So we have a lot of different unions with a lot of different letters, but they're really big unions that represent libraries in Ohio. The reason why some chapters associate with large unions that are not historically representative of the field, such as the Ohio Federation of Teachers, the United Steelworkers, or United Auto Workers, is for more financial and structural support. A lot of times, with having such a large union, there's a lot more support, both in terms of manpower as well as funding, to be able to fight back when there's actions that are taken against the union that are unfair. And then also, a lot of unions have expanded the union coverage that they have, so they encompass service workers as well. For most library workers, their experience in unions are with established unions that have been around for several decades, because public employees in Ohio didn't have the right to collectively bargain until 1983. Some have been around for decades, so unions such as Toledo Public Library, Cleveland Public Library, Lorain Public Library have been around for decades. I did want to give a shout out to Dayton Metro Library. They have an independent union that formed back in 2007. But then also we have a bunch of unions that are popping up recently, thanks in part to Kristin. So in the last 5 years, we've seen Akron Summit County Public Library, Worthington Public Library, Upper Arlington Public Library, Grandview Heights Public Library, Pickerington Public Library, Athens County Public Library, Delaware County, and then filed for their election in December of this past year, Columbus Metropolitan Library. So we've seen a uptick as of late in the past 5 years of more libraries becoming union shops.
Shout out to SEIU for Akron Summit County Library's union win as well.
Mhm. So I did want to talk about the structure of library unions. And so this is for a lot of bigger unions, they sort of are following a bylaws. And so with this comes like a leadership sort of structure that is followed by different union chapters. So that means different library unions follow the same sort of format. So unions leadership consists of an executive board, delegates and stewards, and then committee members. Members run for these roles in an election, and the election is run and voted on by the workers. There is an executive board for large union organizations such as OFT and SEIU, but then there are executive board representatives that represent your chapter or like your library union. Executive board representatives, delegates, stewards, and committee members are all comprised of your coworkers. Union chapters may also create their own positions in accordance to bylaws of that larger labor union to help carry out work related to gathering information and filing grievances. And then delegates or stewards, sort of depends on, which union you're in or what your chapter uses, are union members that are well versed in your contract. They receive training and they help serve as a communicator between everyday workers and management. Delegates and stewards are elected to be a workplace representative and are typically the first person in your union leadership you talk to if you have any workplace concerns. Then there's also external committees. So those are committees that sort of collaborate between labor, so the union, as well as management. So some committees you might see in your labor union at your workplace might be the Labor Management Committee and then also the Health and Safety Committee. These are for issues that occur between contract negotiations. And typically these committees will meet once a month or quarterly to talk about concerns that workers have with the hope that these could be resolved just through a conversation rather than having that wait out all the way till negotiations. And then union chapters may create their own internal committees. This work involves activities, events, or coming up with proposals within the union chapter for those upcoming negotiations. And those internal committees typically do not confer with management. They're more of just meetings within work with in between workers. And then once that first contract is established, unions bargain subsequent contracts to ensure workers' interests are always represented. So bargaining priorities are determined by surveying membership prior to the start of negotiations. And typically negotiations span 1 year for the first contract for a newly established shop, but that could also take even longer, sometimes, unfortunately. And then for established union chapters, it could be 4 to 6 months. But there's a lot of different tactics that could be used, so those numbers are not definite.
Yeah, it really depends on how much needs to be negotiated. And when you're building a first contract, that does take a long time because you are building it from scratch. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. And so often you'll hear folks talk about first contracts taking a while. On average, I would say like a casual estimate's about a year, but sometimes it does take longer than that for the initial one. But I will say in my experience, it was worth it.
And so I wanted to highlight some different example questions of examples that you might interact with your union at your workplace. So concerns about the schedule, that's a good topic to bring up to your delegate or steward that's located within your department or building. Any concerns about building safety, that's a good idea to bring up to a committee that meets with management, such as health and safety or labor management. Any sort of concerns about possible discipline, or if you receive notice that you're wanting to have there's a meeting that's going to be between management and you, that's a good idea to talk to your union leadership, such as your delegate or steward, but then also your executive leadership as well. And then finally, union benefits. There's also benefits such as savings that you get in a lot of unions as well. So if you are interested in union benefit information, it would be a good idea to contact your union member center.
All right, so now you know what an established union looks like. Let's talk about what happens if you don't already have an established union in your workplace. What do we mean when we're talking about organizing a union? Organizing in library land often means something a lot different than it means in the labor world.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I jumped forward. So it's important to remember that today's workers are building contracts from scratch and building things from the ground up in a lot of cases where there was no established structure before. So it can look a lot different than workplaces where the union may have been around for many years, or even, I mean, some of our teachers' unions are 90 years old. It's very different when you're starting out new, but the nice part is you kind of get to make it what you want it, fresh.
So what pushes workers to organize? So like Kristin was saying, recognizing an issue or need at your workplace. So a, a lot of those unions that where in the last 5 years also coincidentally happened right during or after COVID. So there was a lot of concerns, and we did see overall in the country a lot more push for labor organizing in relation to safety protocols during the start of the COVID pandemic. And part of that also with staffing levels leading to high turnover, and then also wages and how they're not keeping up with the cost of living. Other times, workers want to get more meaningfully involved in their workplace. They really care about the well-being of their coworkers, and they feel that they want to lead that fight to help everyone else out. And then also personal experiences. A lot of my coworkers that are involved in unions are involved in unions because their parents or grandparents were also big labor organizers as well. So they have a very, it's very close to their heart.
Okay, so union. The union, a lot of times when people talk about it, it becomes sort of a nebulous third party that people sort of can envision as a comes into the workplace and takes over or starts making changes. But the union is actually the workers, all of you together in your workplace. The union is built by you, and it starts with workers having conversations with their colleagues about their passions and concerns in their workplace, the changes that you want to see, the concerns you have, and what you love most about your jobs and want to ensure that you get to continue enjoying in your workplace. But this organizing from the ground up does not happen without a structure. It doesn't just happen with casual conversations over a lengthy period of time. So my job as a union organizer, for instance, is to connect with workers who want to help who want to form unions in their workplace and help them navigate the organizing process and coordinating the administrative and behind the scenes work, like scheduling regular meetings for their organizing committees, teaching workers about their rights, educating folks on how to organize their coworkers and how to get their coworkers involved after finding out what they're passionate about, what they care about. All of that work that I do behind the scenes helps free up worker organizers to do the essential work of gauging support and having one-on-one conversations with their colleagues. The reason that's so important is because the workers are the people who see the community every day, who run the library every day, who are right there in the thick of it every single day. And I know for myself and my colleagues, we often had great ideas that we would love to have an outlet to share based on the needs we saw in our buildings or in our communities, but we didn't always have a way to share those ideas or get any traction on them. Um, but as workers continue to talk to each other, they start to realize that they have commonly felt issues amongst them, usually, and other patterns become recognizable. So the union organizing committee, which is made up of workers who have come together voluntarily to form the union on their own time outside of work, along with their lead organizer, like me, can use feedback from their coworkers to determine what issues are most deeply and widely felt amongst the workforce. This helps them determine what to prioritize in contract bargaining. But like we mentioned, there's a lot that goes on between starting to talk about forming a union and getting to the bargaining table and ratifying your first contract. So quickly, I'll go through sort of the general phases of the unionization process. So the I would call it the first phase, but really it's ongoing forever, even when the union's established. The first phase, though, is organizing. This is having those meaningful conversations with your coworker, building connections, and asking about their support for a union in the workplace. This takes time. It takes a lot of listening. It takes practice. But with your colleagues, as you work together, you really do get the feel for more common than you realized before. And that maybe you have the same desire to improve your workplace. So workers on the organizing committee have a staff union organizer like me that continues throughout the process to keep them on track and make sure all of the administrative work gets done. But once they get to the point of having talked to all of their coworkers and they have a majority of support voiced for forming the union, you file for a union election to gain legal recognition for your union. In Ohio, with public library workers, as I did with my colleagues, we file for an election with the State Employment Relations Board, which is the board that I mentioned, oversees the Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act in Ohio. If you are forming a union with a private employer, you would have an election with the National Labor Relations Board, which is private sector. So once you've voted for your election, sent in your mail-in ballots, you've won by a strong majority, then you start preparing to negotiate your first contract. This whole process from the beginning of reaching out to a union organizer to ask how to form the union, all the way to ratifying your first contract and beyond, is all member driven, all worker driven. So I suppose you're not members at the beginning, you're aspiring members, but the workers drive that entire process. So in many ways, from voicing their opinion through surveys that the organizing committees created, conducting research on other contracts to help draft policy, drafting language for proposals, for contract articles, and also meeting with management at the bargaining table to negotiate. And that's all just sort of setting up the foundation for your very first union contract. Members vote to ratify that contract, and it only goes into effect if it is accepted by a majority vote. And that, once the contract is ratified, is called a tentative agreement. Uh, well, and then all the members vote on it, and then it gets solidified into the contract. So once that contract's been ratified, you begin the process of enforcing your contract and running your union. You've never really stopped. You really started it from the very beginning, but it's a buildable process. So you sort of learn skills as you go along. And once you get past that first contract negotiation, you get to learn what it's like to build all the structures that Julie talked about earlier. And again, every step of this process is democratic, and members determine their representatives in their building, their coworkers, their stewards. They determine what language they want to have in their constitution, what their bylaws are. So workers that are forming brand new unions really get to build all that from scratch. And in existing unions, there are processes in place for those bylaws, constitutions, and of course the contract to be reviewed on a regular basis so that changes can be made or negotiated in the case of a contract. Okay, that's a lot. So I'll breathe for a second so that you can see just a quick view of some reasons why different library workers have chosen to organize. And I realize I'm going through these quickly, but we will share our slides. And if you'd like to see the contracts for any of the libraries who have ratified their contracts, including those with other unions or unions that have been around for quite some time, all of that can be found on the State Employment Relations Board website. We have a resources page. It's SERB, serb.ohio.gov, and you can go to their collective bargaining agreements archive and search for any employer name, public employer name in Ohio, and you can view the contents of their contracts, both current and previous. Okay, so there's a look at what's been going on. So like Julie mentioned, in 2020, workers nationwide seemed to start talking more about labor rights because we went through such drastic changes around COVID. With my library, we were the first library in Franklin County to organize a union, which is Columbus area in Ohio. And we began organizing surrounding two issues. One was a mass staff reorganization, and the other was the COVID, when the library shut down, was about 3 months after our mass reorganization. So those were two major issues for us. So we won our election by a landslide, and then soon after that, other library workers started reaching out and asking to form their unions. That's sort of how, that's exactly how I got the job that I have now and moved from full-time reference librarianship to union organizing for library workers because there is so much interest in having a say in the policies at your workplace or how things are run or, um, you know, getting to be in leadership roles without having to have a management title. So there has been all of these articles you're seeing are all from the last 5 years. Um, so there's been lots and lots and lots of labor movement within the library world in Ohio in the last couple of years in particular. So I just wanted to highlight some of those for you all. And now we can talk about some of the big contract wins.
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in before that. I was sharing this with a friend earlier, just how with Worthington Libraries sort of being the first one in Franklin County and just how it led to a domino effect where then you have Columbus Metropolitan Library, which is a lot larger, forming a union. It just shows that something that you might think might be a small win or may not be all that of a big deal could really have wide-ranging impacts for the rest of the state. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I just want to talk about here's some contract wins for Ohio library workers. When Kristin and I were sharing some of the contract wins, we've noticed that there was a lot of shared wins from both of our experiences. So, with each local union decides what to prioritize during contract negotiations. Some notable examples of what are considered contract wins for workers are here. We talked about bargaining for policies like paid parental leave. This is an important illustration of the difference your union can make. In the US, paid parental leave is not a standard worker benefit. But for workers that use paid parental leave, they can receive the necessary family leave that they need without having to deplete sick time benefits. And for workers who are part-time, which is from talking to other coworkers, it's very common that a
Mhm.
lot of workforces are more part-time than full-time. They are not eligible for federal job protections under FMLA, which has a certain required hour allotment. These policies ensure that they don't risk their jobs if they need extended time off related to parental leave. For some libraries, workers have earned more pay time off beyond sick leave, vacation time, or holidays, but also pay time off for religious holidays and personal business affairs. Um, Kristin, do you want to talk a little bit about paid assault leave?
Yeah, paid assault leave is something that when I say we, I'm referring to my former position. My colleagues and I at Worthington negotiated into our first contract. They just at the beginning of this year ratified their second contract, but they do have a policy at Worthington for paid assault leave, and that protects a worker. Or I'm sorry, it provides a worker with up to 5 days of paid time off in the event of physical assault at work, whether uh, regardless of who perpetrated it, um, you qualify for up to 5 additional paid days off that do not come out of your paid or sick time. And safety issues are something that come up a lot in libraries and amongst the workers that are working the front lines right now. I mean, there's gun violence in our libraries on a regular basis around the state and along with other things. And we're just, we're buildings that are open to the public, and we know that sometimes that can be unpredictable. So having a protection like paid assault leave, even if it doesn't need to be used or hopefully never gets used or used rarely, it's something that provides employees at the library with a little bit of cushion in case something like that comes up.
Yeah. And then finally, I wanted to just talk about improved benefits and pay raises. And so some of our unions have also negotiated for lower health insurance premiums for employer paid insurance. So that's important also for part-time workers since those premiums go up if you're not working as many hours. So. Yeah, and so we sort of have been talking about how we're sharing a lot of these contract wins. And so, as library workers in Ohio bargain for better working conditions, living wages, and more benefits, all library workers benefit. So, just a quick anecdote, I have a friend who was a branch manager in another library system that was actually advocating for a union for its staff association. He felt that the union would lead to better employee morale and working conditions. I've observed that a lot of low and mid-level managers often share the same sentiments as union workers, but are not able to affect change as a union would. Through a union, non-bargaining union staff, such as shelvers and seasonal employees, also see improved working conditions and communication, such as transparency and even pay. So,
I'll share another example of how collective bargaining in one local union, and when I say local union, I mean the workers within one workplace. That's called a local union. Within one local can negotiate for policies or benefits that end up benefiting others, not just other unions. And in this story, it is benefiting another local union in the state and other workers. But it can also benefit workers outside of our industry too, just by setting a standard geographically. So when I was on the bargaining committee for WPL United's first contract, one benefit that I felt really passionate about was paid parental leave. I had a child while I was working at the library when there was not paid parental leave, and I was full-time, so thankfully I qualified for FMLA. But I did have to deplete my sick time in order to stay home with my child after he was born. Um, so I decided to take the lead and write a proposal for paid parental leave, and I presented it at the bargaining table as a member of the bargaining committee for WPL United. So I sat across from the library CEO and administrative, their group of their bargaining team on the administrative side, excuse me. And I told the story of just what the effects of a lack of that policy had on us at the library and what the real life effects look like in order to illustrate what those policies look like, not just in theory, policies that had maybe been around for some of them for multiple decades, but how that really looked when it was put into practice with real people. So it was an opportunity for me as an individual worker to talk about something that I was passionate about while advocating for better policies for all of my coworkers. So WPL United and the library ended up negotiating over this proposal, and we secured a contract article giving staff 6 weeks of paid parental leave that was not deducted from sick or vacation pay. And that's something that I'm so proud of for them. And I know that other WPL workers and other workers outside of our library have benefited from the results of these policies. Julie can tell you how her library ties in there.
yeah, so then, funny enough, in 2023, when we were looking at the negotiations and sort of coming up with proposals for our upcoming contract negotiations, a lot of our members really felt strongly about paid parental leave. And so this is where SERB came in handy. So going in SERB and looking up and also looking online that Worthington Libraries was able to get paid parental leave as a contract win. We used their language at the negotiation table for proposing it as a policy, and we also now have that as a contract win, and we have a lot of members that are using that benefit. So it's a really, really great benefit and just sort of goes to show how a win at one library could also impact another library system. And for us, we have around 500, 600 members. So that really makes a big, big difference for people if they're not able to get FMLA. So.
Yeah, by comparison, Worthington's contract covers about 90 workers, I think. So that's a sizable increase of people benefiting from that. And Julie and I did not know each other prior to this presentation, so we didn't know that we had collaborated in that way. But like we've mentioned, workplace improvements that are gained through collective bargaining, like we just talked about, do tend to increase benefits to all workers in the organization, not just those who are eligible for union membership. So, a supervisor who's not eligible for the union can also qualifies for assault leave because the library's Board of Trustees um, adopted all of the policies from the union contract into their personnel policy manual for all staff, which tends to happen. Not always, but it does tend to happen. I haven't personally seen it go any other way. So for example, when WPLU won our election in 2022, other Central Ohio libraries within weeks or months started announcing wage increases. And that was before we had a chance to even get to the bargaining table. We were still trying to, um, get those dates set up, but other library workers were benefiting from the fact that a, a vocal group of library workers had stood up and publicly formed a union. And so once we did bargain for higher wages in our contract, we set the bar for library worker wages in Franklin County and set it higher than it had been before. In that first contract, we secured guaranteed annual raises and increases on the midpoint of the wage scale for the length of the contract. So year one was a 5.5% increase, year two was 4%, year three was 3.5. But the effective raises for some of our lowest paid workers who were working in shelving positions, some of them got as much as a 15% effective raise because they were so far below the midpoint of the pay scale before our contract went into effect that once the contract went into effect, they got a significant pay increase, which was great for them because they deserve living wages. Um, so that's just an example. So let's show some ways that people can get involved in the union.
Yeah. So a union is only as strong as its members, but there are many ways to get involved. If you enjoy navigating through difficult situations between workers and management, perhaps you can be a delegate or building steward. What if you're really into art, but your job at work doesn't let you explore that side? You can help create art for your chapter's newsletter. Or if you are really known for your quick-witted puns, creating union materials and signs sounds like a good job for you. Your union needs a wide range of skills and leaders. You can be a shelver, cataloger, or special collections librarian, but you can be a leading voice in the union, elected or unelected, and share the passions you may not be able to do within your work duties. So some ways of getting involved, even if it's just showing up to meetings, is a way of supporting your union. If you want to go further, you can run for a building delegate position or even run for a committee or executive board position. If you'd like to show solidarity with other unions, you can attend other actions such as rallies. In Ohio's case, we had a library worker lobby day, which was our way of doing some political action. So we have some photos from that.
Yeah, actually, great segue to this picture. Here's a picture of our very first Library Workers Lobby Day in 2025. You may have heard of Library Lobby Day. This one is the first advocacy day focused on frontline library workers going to speak to their Congress people and advocating for their communities and for their work in front of elected leaders at the State House. So just this last summer, Ohio Federation of Teachers, my union, and Julie's union, which is part of SEIU 1199, jointly collaborated since we all represent library workers. We collaborated to create Library Workers Lobby Day. So we had dozens of library workers from around the state. It was primarily workers from Central Ohio and Northeast Ohio from these two unions. Um, Came down to the State House all on one day. We spent the day together. We talked to leaders in the legislature. We watched legislative session. We got to talk to Congress people about pending legislation that was affecting libraries. In this particular case, it was the Public Library Fund and the proposed legislation requiring censoring of books related to gender and sexuality in public libraries, which was in the proposed budget for the state. So unlike other lobby days that have centered on management or administrators, Library Workers Lobby Day centers the experts, which is all of you, all of the frontline library staff who serve the communities directly every day, because you know what your communities need and you are the experts in your field. So here's some examples, some more fun examples to get us to towards the end here, just to show you all some fun, different activities that were done by some local union members from both of our respective unions. These first pictures are from the WPL United House Bill 86 rally, protest rally. House Bill 86 is the title for the budget bill. So we had community members and library workers, not just from Worthington Public Libraries, but from other libraries around in the community. Um, Plus, you get some really cute library specific signs, which is fun. See, you do not have to be the loudest voice or the most outgoing. You could be the quiet artist or the data person, or maybe you're the loud data person who's also an artist. There's room for everyone. So they took something really serious and turned it into a way to raise awareness in their community and share resources. So they also handed out pamphlets that had phone numbers and QR codes to send letters and also call and contact your legislators and Governor DeWine to oppose the language in the budget that was going to affect public libraries. So it wasn't just a fun party in the community square, it was also an effective way to get their community engaged around that legislation. And then here we have Cuyahoga County Public Library workers having an informational picket from 2024. A lot of times you see pickets, and that's like one of the most recognizable things about unions, right? Are the pickets. They're not, uh, something that you see every day, but when you see them, it's pretty intertwined with the image of labor unions. It's important to have a visual of collective power and workers standing together. And picketing like this, or withholding labor in the case of a strike picket, is the strongest power that workers have. Your labor is your power in your workplace. So working together, you can make huge, huge changes, or just improve upon things that you already love and just get involved in different ways at your library. So we've got some resources for you here. And we can have our host share our slides with the participants too, so that you all can get all of this. And feel free to reach out if you have questions, or if you want to hear more, you can reach me or Julie at the contact info there.
Thanks so much, Kristin and Julie, for that excellent presentation. We have one question so far in the Q&A. I encourage everyone to go and drop your questions there. And the one question that we have so far does seem like a good one to have in the recording. So I'm going to ask the question, but I'm not going to share the name. This person's question is, as someone who knows nothing about unions, do you suggest any resources to learn about unions, the history, how to start one, or anything else that would be useful to know?
Yes, the some of the resources that we just showed, and I can pull those back up too to show folks, are helpful places to start if you're just looking for some basic information. If you are looking to ask more questions or learn more about sort of the details of what it means to form a union, I'm always happy to talk about that too. Usually, a good resource would be talking to a fellow union worker or a union organizer. And so I'd be happy to chat anytime as well. But let me pull our resources back up just as a general look. Let's see, can I back us up?
I did also want to jump into that, like on OFT's website as well as SEIU, a lot of those bigger unions, if you look, it says, if you look on their websites, a lot of times they'll say like, want to start a union at your workplace, or like don't know how, fill out
Hmm.
this form and we'll reach out to you. And so that's sort of a nice way where sometimes it could be overwhelming to try to sift through a lot of information.
Yeah.
And uh, usually as someone that reaches out to you, it's more of a one-on-one sort of conversation. So it's a little bit easier to sift through a lot of that. Workcenter.gov was good where it gives like an overview of labor unions and sort of like where we got a lot of those like definitions of like what is a union and sort of the terminology. Um, and then the link that I have there for ALA's APA, it says it's alaapa.org. You don't have to be an ALA member to look at that website. But there is a union page on there which talks about also starting a union as well. And that might be helpful if you're in an academic library or a special library, just to sort of get an overview of starting a union in a library as well. So.
I put the general contact email for OFT into the chat too. If anyone has additional questions, that email goes to our organization, but it also goes to me since it's my job. So, um, yeah, if any questions come up, a library organizer is always happy to talk. So the second
That
page of
is our
resources that we had, um, I would say these ones are just more informational. The first page with our CML United workers there, those are going to have more resources talking about practical things like getting started. And then the second page is more stats, except for Fabazi Atari's um, seminal work, Vocational Online Librarianship, which I just recommend that anybody in library work reads. Um, Fabazi passed away last year, but she did a lot of work around this concept. She coined the term vocational awe. So if you've heard of that idea, you know, this concept that, maybe you do your work not for the money, but for the help that you bring the community, et cetera, which is a thing we hear a lot, right? And can be true. But we also have rights as workers in this country. So we want to explore ways to have respectful policies. And Favazi really goes into worker exploitation in some ways in which you can change your thinking about how work and librarianship and work-life balance intersect.
We haven't gotten any other questions, but I'll give it an uncomfortable silence before we close things up. But before everybody dips out, we do have a little evaluation link that we request that all of our attendees fill out. That helps us learn how we can improve and what other topics might interest you in the future.
Yes, please ask
Okay.
me.
We have another question. What are some of the easiest and hardest parts of starting or being part of a union?
That's a great question. I'll take that one. I would say that the hardest part is overcoming the um, preconceived ideas you have about the leadership structure in your workplace. It was really hard to transition from thinking about a top-down structure to thinking about collectively working together and then bargaining with administration. You know, it was a cultural shift, and it was hard for us to sometimes realize that right off the bat that we had the ability to negotiate over certain changes that were being proposed when we weren't used to being in a union environment when it was brand new. Um, so I would say that just like almost the cultural shift of it in the workplace was very different. I'd worked in a union job before. My first library job was at Toledo Lucas County Public Library, and I got 3 raises in the first 6 months thanks to my union contract there as a teenager. So I knew what it was like a little bit to be an established union, but I I came to this work not knowing anything about unions other than that I was raised in a union town and a union family, but I didn't know anything about how they worked. Um, I I just reached out to a union in a time when my coworkers and I were scared and looking for support and looking for ways to have a say in the policies at our library in March and April of 2020 when the pandemic was at its height. And I was fortunate enough to be connected specifically with OFT, and our president, Melissa Cropper, is a library media specialist. So she spoke with me via Zoom over lockdown. And yeah, my coworkers and I started meeting. And the easiest part was finding folks that were interested in and excited in having a say in things at work. People were really excited about having an opportunity to be more involved or get their voices heard or get their ideas out there. So the easiest part was making connections with my coworkers, even if I didn't necessarily know all of them, and it was a bit of a learning curve to get comfortable talking to folks that I wasn't personally familiar with, but we all became very close in the process, and it made a great foundation for a strong union.
I just want to jump in and said that to say like the hardest part of being like I'm an established union, but it's difficult to figure out when is something worth putting the fight for, versus is it a common sentiment among a majority of our members, or is this just one person being extremely vocal about a problem that may not impact the rest of the membership? So those are things that worth considering, and then also being very much solutions driven versus being very critical. A lot of times I hear complaints, but I'm always trying to think of, well, how can I make this something that is a possible solution or recommendation that I'm willing to help with carrying out that solution or change. So it could be hard because if there's a lot of criticism that you hear, you don't want to downplay what their concerns are, but it's also trying to come up with ways that are going to align or be appeasing or meet the mission or values of the workplace that you're working for. So it's sometimes coming up with a way that's a suggestion or program or proposal that's taking that criticism in a way that could be carried out that works for both workers as well as the workplace. So yeah, the easiest is just having the community. It's really great to see people also in social events as well.
We're right at about an hour, so I'll try to be respectful of your time, but we do have one more question, so we'll try to get to that, but after that, we'll wrap things up. This final question is, how do you engage with the idea that a workplace would only organize if something is wrong with leadership or the assumption that it will be a fight?
Great question. First, I'll say that you don't have to be unhappy at work to organize a union, and or to be a member of the union. There are lots of preconceived notions because when people are talking about things they'd like to change and issues that they see that need solutions, sometimes that sounds like complaining, and sometimes you have groups of leaders who are working on solutions who can get those things moving, and that makes it a little bit better. But you don't only have to organize a union just because there are things that you're unhappy with or that the workplace at large is unhappy with. I think the original question mentioned leadership. Um, there's not there's not really much, I guess, engagement with that idea from my end because I'm working with the workers who are organizing the union, and they know that they're organizing because of all of the reasons that we mentioned earlier, and not organizing as a vendetta or organizing against something or someone. They're organizing for positive change. So that's the way that I look at it, and the way that I've seen those ideas play out in real time.
I just wanted to say with like all of the possible funding cuts going on too with Ohio, that that's something where it may not be a problem or concern with leadership, but just more of for your overall long-term tenure and longevity at your workplace. That's where organizing a union helps so you're able to bargain for wages, whereas otherwise, if you didn't have that budget from the state, or if you have funding cuts for a university, could really be that much more impactful without having a union. So even just framing it as a way of not so much just with the organization, but the overall political structure in a state like Ohio is a nice way of, making sure that the workers have protections.
All right. We'll wrap it up today. Thanks again, Kristin and Julie. That was really valuable information. We will be posting the recording online on YouTube as well as the New to Libraries Network website. So keep an eye out for the follow-up email with that. And again, we have another webinar coming up on April 15th at 3 o'clock covering cataloging basics. We don't have the event posting published for that yet, but we will be emailing that to everyone. And have a good evening. That's all for today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.